the human who spoke without fear. No human had ever spoken to the alien queen without permission. Most never spoke at all. They knelt, they bowed, they lowered their eyes and waited for judgment. That was the rule across the Triarch expanse, across the living cities grown from crystal and bone, across the fleets that darkened suns and rewrote star charts. The Queen of Erexia did not rule by decree alone. She ruled by presence. Her very existence bent wills, compressed air, and made even the bravest warriors swallow their words before they reached their tongues. Her name, translated loosely into human language, meant she who survived all fire. Among her own people, she was called Xerxvale. Among humans, she was called something else. Monster, tyrant, devourer of worlds. I stood in her throne chamber with none of those words in my mouth. I had been brought there as part of a cultural exchange. At least, that was the official explanation given to Earth's Coalition Council. In reality, I was expendable. A linguist, a historian, a man with no military value and no political power. If negotiations failed, my death would be a footnote, not a headline. The chamber was vast enough to swallow cathedrals. The floor pulsed faintly, as if the ship itself breathed beneath our feet. Tall pillars curved upward like the ribs of colossal beasts. At the far end, upon a throne that seemed grown rather than built, sat the queen. She was larger than a human, but not grotesque. Taller, longer-limbed, her form elegant and terrifying in equal measure. Her skin shimmered with a deep obsidian hue that caught the light like oil on water. Her eyes, four of them, arranged in a pattern that should have unsettled me more than it did, glowed with intelligence so sharp it felt like being dissected alive. I felt it then. The pressure. It wasn't gravity. It was authority. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to kneel. I didn't. Not because I was brave. Because I was tired. Tired of fear. Tired of watching humanity shrink itself in the presence of gods it decided were unbeatable. The queen's voice rolled through the chamber without her moving her mouth, resonant and layered, as if several voices spoke in harmony. You are the human emissary. Yes, I said. My voice echoed, thin but steady. My name is Elias Rowan. Her gaze sharpened. You do not kneel. I was not instructed to. I replied honestly, only to speak. A ripple moved through the attendants lining the chamber. Virexian nobles, generals, pre-scientists. Shock, amusement, anger. The queen leaned forward slightly. Then speak. I did. I spoke of trade routes and shared technologies, of borders and misunderstandings. I spoke of human fear and alien pride, of cycles of violence that benefited no one but history's ghosts. I spoke carefully, choosing each word like a step across thin ice. She listened, not politely, not patiently, intently. When I finished, silence fell like a held breath. The queen rose from her throne. Every Virexian in the chamber knelt as one. I remained standing. She descended the steps, her presence growing heavier with each one. When she stopped in front of me, she towered over my 6-foot human frame, her shadow swallowing me whole. You speak as if you believe me capable of restraint, she said. I believe you're capable of choice, I answered. One of her hands, long finger claw-tipped, lifted my chin, forcing me to meet her gaze. I saw curiosity there, and something else. Loneliness. The words slipped out before I could stop them. You'd make a good wife, I said softly, meaning something entirely different than how it sounded. To your people, to your empire. The chamber exploded into chaos. Gasps, hisses, weapons half-drawn. The queen did not strike me. She did not roar. She leaned closer until her breath, warm, faintly metallic, brushed my ear, and she whispered, so only I could hear, "Then make me yours." The weight of a queen's choice. I did not understand what I had agreed to until the doors closed behind me. I was not executed. I was not imprisoned. I was escorted, ceremonially, into the inner sanctum of the Queen's living quarters. Virexian culture, as it turned out, did not separate rulership from partnership. A queen did not rule alone. She was expected to bind herself politically, emotionally, biologically, to a consort who could stabilize her reign. Xerix Vale had refused every candidate for decades. Until me, not because I was human, because I had spoken to her as an equal. The first weeks were a blur of protocol and survival. I learned quickly how to stand without appearing defiant, how to speak without triggering offense, how to read the subtle color shifts in her skin that indicated mood. She learned, too. She learned that humans use humor to mask fear, that we touched without dominance, that our word wife carried implications of partnership, not ownership. At night we spoke, not as queen and emissary, as two beings burdened by expectation. She told me her ascension, how she had survived ritual combat against her own siblings, how mercy was seen as weakness among her people, how she had buried desire beneath duty until she no longer knew which was which. I told her about Earth, about rain, about music played on old instruments that vibrated against the chest, about choosing someone not because they were useful, but because they saw you one night, as bioluminescent light drifted across the chamber like slow stars. She asked me a question that changed everything. If you had power like mine, she asked, would you rule? No, I said after a moment. I'd build something that didn't need ruling. She considered that for a long time. Our bond became official not through ceremony, but through challenge. The Virexian High Council opposed me openly. A human consort was unthinkable. They demanded a trial, not a combat, but of endurance. I would be bound to the Queen's neural lattice for one planetary cycle, sharing fragments of her sensory and emotional experience. It would break most minds. I accepted. For 30 days, I felt her world, the weight of billions depending on her decisions, the constant threat of assassination, the ache of suppressing softness in a culture that devoured it. And she felt mine, the fragility, the hope, the stubborn belief that things could be better. When the trial ended, the Queen emerged changed. So did I. She stood before the council and spoke words no Virexian ruler had ever spoken. I choose him, she said, not as a symbol, not as a trophy, but as my equal. War followed, not from her people, but from without. A rival empire, sensing weakness, launched an incursion into Virexian space. The Queen took to the battlefield, and for the first time, I stood beside her, not behind. I did not fight with weapons. I fought with ideas. I coordinated alliances, exploited diplomatic fractures, convinced neutral systems to intervene not out of fear, but mutual benefit. Humanity joined the conflict, not as vassals, but as partners. The war ended not with annihilation, but with surrender. The galaxy watched and learned. ending, making her mine. The coronation chamber looked different now. Softer. The throne remained, but beside it stood another seat, grown from the same living structure, intertwined but distinct. I wore no crown. Neither did she. Virexian law had been rewritten. The queen would remain ruler, but her power would be balanced by council, by shared governance, by something dangerously new. Trust. When she took my hand before the gathered worlds, the touch was not possessive. It was grounding. Once, she said, her voice carrying across systems, a human called me a good wife. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He did not mean obedience, she continued. He meant care, strength without cruelty, power without isolation. She turned to me then, her 4 eyes soft in a way I had once thought impossible. You told me to be yours, she said quietly. I did, I answered, and I meant it. She leaned close, her forehead resting against mine, a gesture that had become ours. Then rule with me, she whispered. Not above, not beneath. I smiled. Always. The galaxy did not become peaceful overnight, but it became possible. And sometimes, late at night, when the stars drifted past the palace windows and the weight of empire loosened its grip, she would rest her head against my shoulder and ask me about rain again. I would tell her, and she would listen, not as a queen, but as my wife.